So where I left things off last time was with the consequences of the problem of induction, the problem Hume poses in chapter 4. But I didn't, because I didn't follow the text that closely, I didn't tell you the context in which the problem of induction arises in chapter 4. Hume, in the beginning of chapter 4, argues that any reasoning about matters of fact, remember, matters of fact for Hume are contrasted with relations of ideas. Relations of ideas are claims that can be known by reason alone, they can be known a priori, because the denial of any relation of ideas is a contradiction. So you can know that it's true because you can know for sure that its denial is false because its denial is just contradictory. But that doesn't involve much, right? Like you don't know a lot just by knowing that all contradictions are false, right? So like I have a book here, right? That this book is made by human beings, I can know by probably reason alone because it's probably part of the definition of book, that it's a human artifact. But this book has a certain number of pages, right? And let's say it's, well, actually, let's look it up. Right? 300. Ooh, I got a lot of reading ahead of me. 341 pages long. The claim that this book, The Color of Law, is 341 pages long is a matter of fact. You could deny that, and it wouldn't be a contradiction. To say this book is 345 pages long would be false, but you wouldn't know that just by saying what follows from claiming the book is 345 pages long, that the book is not 341 pages long, or 2, or whatever I said. So, and just think of like almost any claim you'd want to make about the world. It's a matter of fact. What Hume says is that the way we come to know matter of facts when reasoning is involved is through the idea of cause and effect. Remember, that's one of the relations that ideas can have towards each other. One of the things that can cause you to move from one idea to another. And that's fundamentally what Hume says reasoning is. It's the process by which your mind goes from one idea to another idea. Now, we get our ideas originally by copying impressions. And there is that analysis and synthesis operation our minds can engage in that gives us ideas of things we've never observed. But if you want to move from one idea to another distinct idea, which is what Hume thinks is always involved when you're making a claim about a matter of fact, you're combining two ideas, or you're attaching two ideas to each other, which are distinct, right? One isn't contained in the other, in the way that the idea of book is contained within or rather, other way around. The idea artifact is contained within the idea book, which is why I can say this book is an artifact, meaning it was something that was created on purpose. But if I want to say this book was written by a man, right? Because I had to look, I forgot who wrote it. There's nothing in the nature of book, the idea book, that its author be male, right? And so to make the claim, well, that book was written by a man, is to combine two distinct ideas, neither of which is contained in the other. What Hume thinks is anytime you want to move from one idea to another, cause and effect is involved, or reasoning involving cause and effect. If you want to make a claim about the world that doesn't follow immediately from what you see, in the way that, like, all right, I've got 2 cans here, one of which actually has some soda left in it. I've got 2 cans here. A lot of my examples involve cans because I'm always drinking sodas. If I see 2 cans, then it follows directly that there is at least 1 can, right? I don't need to reason about cause and effect in order to know from observing 2 cans that there is in the world at least 1 can. But if I wanted to make the claim that tomorrow there will be 2 cans in the world, just like there are at least 2 cans in the world now because I see 2. Well, that involves cause and effect, because the idea of cans existing now doesn't include the idea of the cans existing tomorrow, because I know from my inspecting my idea about cans that they can go out of existence, right? I could make this not a can pretty quickly with a pair of scissors. I could make it just a bunch of aluminum scraps. And so anytime you want to go beyond what your senses tell you, cause and effect is involved. And the reasoning involved in cause and effect is not deductive. You're not reasoning deductively when you say that X causes Y. Now, of course, you could be, right, if you already knew some general principle like all X's cause Y's, right? But there we start getting into the problem I introduced you to in the previous video. Where do you get these general principles? Well, you would get these general principles from induction. But induction doesn't work, or at least here's what's true. There is no justification that can be given for an assumption found in every inductive inference, and that's the uniformity of nature thesis or hypothesis. So, induction has to be involved every time you engage in causal reasoning. If you're going to justify your causal reasoning, it's going to involve induction. And so, if induction itself has no justification, then causal reasoning has no justification. So, you have no justification in believing any matter of fact that goes beyond the matters of fact that you can know are true just by what you're observing now. I made a little argument in the previous video that this also undermines your reason to believe your own memory. Hume doesn't draw that conclusion in this book. He treats memory as fine, but basically you're going to have to appeal to induction in order to justify your faith in your own memory, and so that's out too. So that means the only things we know are the things that we are directly perceiving right now. So for example, right now I'm looking at my computer. I'm not looking at the wall behind me. I would like to believe that the wall behind me continues to exist. But unless I'm looking at it, I don't know that it exists. Then you might say, well, you looked at it a few minutes ago when you sat down in the chair. That's true. In fact, I'll look at it again. Oh, there it is. While I was looking at it just a second ago, I knew it was there. But not now. Right? You might think, well, no, wait, if the wall was there a second ago, it's there now. And I might say, well, why? Then you might say, well, walls last. I was like, well, how do you know walls last? How do you know walls don't pop in and out of existence when you're not looking at them? And you might think that's a silly question, but this kind of question actually came up not that long ago in the history of science. When Albert Einstein was explaining why he really didn't like the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, the version of quantum mechanics developed by Niels Bohr, among others. He said he thought that quantum mechanics, as interpreted by Niels Bohr, had the implication that the moon isn't there, might not be there, or maybe even isn't there when no one's looking at it. Now, that might have been a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's certainly not clear that the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics implies that, but maybe it does, right? The idea that the world is stable and regular in the way that would allow me to infer the existence of the wall behind me from the fact that I looked at that wall a minute or two ago would involve believing the uniformity of nature thesis. That would involve knowing something about the entire universe. Nothing about the entire universe is revealed to me by my senses, and I can't go beyond what's revealed to me by my senses because induction won't work unless I already know the uniformity of nature hypothesis, and there we go. So that's the context in which the problem of induction shows up. But Hume doesn't want to leave it there. He doesn't want to just say, well, that's it. We're never justified, or rather, he doesn't want to, I almost said something wrong. He doesn't want to just say, well, we're not justified in believing cause and effect. Let's stop there. Now, he's not in chapter 5, which is called A Skeptical Solution to These Doubts, the doubts being the problem of induction and all the skepticism that comes with it. He's not going to provide an alternative justification of causal reasoning. This is what Descartes would have done. In fact, Descartes probably would have been kind of impressed. with the problem of induction. And Descartes' response would have probably been like, well, that's why you have to admit that we know some things by reason alone. Not all knowledge is based on the senses, because even like anyone who tries to get knowledge entirely based on the senses runs into the problem that you can't do induction. Probably at this point, Descartes would have been tickled pink and said, so you have to go with me because I claim that I can prove that God exists from using only the knowledge of what my internal senses tell me, my ability to inspect my own mind tells me. And once I get God, I can get you your uniformity of nature hypothesis. I can just tell you, yeah, God would have made the world uniform. That would have been a way Hume could have gone. Then Hume would have ended up being a rationalist, and he would have been a rationalist who had just come up with, a really skeptical argument that Descartes hadn't considered. But of course, Descartes wouldn't have really needed to consider it because the evil demon argument throws every damn thing into doubt, right? So it's not like this provides more doubt or doubt over things that the evil demon argument wouldn't. But Hume doesn't do that. Hume is an empiricist. He's going to provide an account of what goes on in causal reasoning, but not one that justifies it. That's why, in the end, it's a skeptical account. He's not going to provide a justification in terms of reason for our causal reasoning. He's going to say causal reasoning is, in the end, based on what he calls custom or habit. So here's what Hume says. If you've got two objects, X and Y, actually, let's leave causation off for a minute. Let's go back to induction. We'll leave causation for another video. Whenever you perform an induction, right, you're tacitly assuming the uniformity of nature hypothesis. Whoops. Now, what Hume points out is that you can't know that the uniformity of nature hypothesis is true. You can't come up, that is, with good evidence for it, not on an empiricist basis or on an empirical basis. So Hume's solution is going to be, well, that doesn't mean you don't believe it. The beginning of chapter 5 of the book is all about him saying, philosophy can only take us so far. There are certain natural beliefs that we have, that even if we discover that we don't have any reason to believe them, nonetheless, we're still going to believe them. Right? There's some things that reason just can't convince you to genuinely doubt. Descartes kind of hinted at this too when he said, well, those doubts I introduced in Meditation 1, those seemed kind of unreal. Hume's just saying we're built certain ways, right? We are not built to abandon our belief in causal reasoning or in cause and effect, that one thing causes another. And since that seems to involve induction, it seems like we've got to keep reasoning inductively. There's no way out. And since reasoning inductively seems to imply that we have to believe that nature is uniform, or as he would have put it, since it seems like reasoning inductively means we have to believe that the future will be like the past, then we just can't lose that. But we don't get the idea. This is the important point Hume wants to make. He thinks it's impossible for us really to abandon our belief in the uniformity of nature. It's impossible for us to abandon the belief that fundamentally the same laws apply at all times and all places. What he wanted to point out by all this, because you might think well, if we can't get rid of the belief and you're telling us that, then why'd you spend so long trying to have us get rid of the belief? He was going to say, but I wasn't trying to get you to stop believing it. He didn't want us to stop believing in the uniformity of nature. He didn't want us to stop engaging in inductive reasoning and then causal reasoning. What he wanted to show was that the fundamental basis for our belief is not reason. It's not a rational basis. It's habit or custom. Over time, we just get used to the idea that the future will be like the past. And we're sort of predetermined. We're sort of built to do it. Right? You might think it's part of our cognitive structure. We always anticipate, we always come to expect that what we've observed happening in the past will continue to be happening in similar circumstances in the future. But there's nothing to it besides that. It's not that reason has discovered that this is a fundamental fact about the universe. Hume says it's not anything we've discovered except about ourselves. All we've discovered is that we can't avoid doing it. It is a natural tendency of human beings to believe nature is uniform, which allows us to engage in induction, which allows us to believe in cause and effect. Or rather, probably it's closer to right to say that it's human nature to reason inductively and believe in cause and effect, and that means we have to believe in the uniformity of nature. And that means that Hume is actually going back on something that was right there at the beginning of our course with Plato. Because remember in the Meno, Plato's saying that knowledge involves belief, that belief being true, and being able to give an account of that belief. And what that meant, I said, following basically all Plato scholars, is that we needed to give an explanation of why the belief was true. So the belief, we had to believe it to know it. It has to be true if we know it, and we have to be able to explain why it's true. We have to give some kind of reasoning for it. We have to be able to give an argument for it. And Hume says, no. At a certain point, if you follow all the abstract reasoning back far enough, and you get to the real foundations of our thought, and Hume thinks causal reasoning, the belief in causal effect, is right there at the foundation of everything we do intellectually. We take in information from our senses, and then we use causal reasoning to infer things on the basis of what we have observed. At a fundamental level, something like the uniformity of nature hypothesis is not something we can give an explanation of. We can't give an explanation why it's true. The best we can do is give an explanation for why we believe it. And that's just the way we're built. It's the way we all do things. And it's unavoidable, right? You try to live a life without believing that nature is uniform and you'll fail. Right? That habit or custom is sort of hardwired into us. But that's all it is. So underlying every rational thing we believe and do is habit, custom, just like sort of the brute force of our minds, refusing to let go of certain things. Or in other words, at the foundation of everything isn't, like Descartes thought, beliefs that are true and beyond doubt. Hume thinks you can doubt the uniformity of nature thesis. At least you can doubt it intellectually. You can't actually stop believing it, but you can ask yourself, well, do I really have reason to believe that nature is uniform? And Hume thinks is, when you think about it, you realize, no, you don't have any reason to believe that nature is uniform. So what really underlies all your reasoning, every scientific theory, is not reason, but habit, right? A non-rational sort of refusal to give up on certain beliefs. And Hume says that's the best you can do. Right? At a certain point, reasoning has to stop, and you just have to say, I believe it, I can't help but believe it, time to move on. Now that would be kind of monumental in itself. It's Hume giving up on the entire project of philosophy that had happened prior to Hume. Right? Plato sort of sets the stage for all of this. This idea that we have to justify our beliefs in order to have knowledge is not something Aristotle or Descartes or really anyone in between ever doubted. They were just all involved in the project of figuring out how to justify the things they believed. Hume's going to come along and say, well, when you get right down to it, at bottom, this is not about justification. This is just about discovering what we can and can't do intellectually. We can't get rid of the belief that that nature is uniform. We can't get rid of the belief that the future will be like the past. And part of the reason is that's involved in causal reasoning, which is the key to all reasoning. Now, that by itself, like I said, would be a major accomplishment if it's true that Hume has established this. But it's also going to play a role in his rather unique view about the nature of causation, which is going to play into his theory about the nature of freedom of the will. We'll cover that in a later video.